Toronto police are investigating the third shooting in 3 straight nights. In all the cases, the attacks were in heavily populated areas of the downtown core of the city, and there are no suspects in any of them. All of this is rattling Toronto residents. The CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick is at the scene of the latest shooting near what's known as the Fashion District. So Megan, what's the latest?
Well, Andrew, there's no visible signs anymore here of what occurred earlier this morning. When we first got here this morning, there was a police forensics unit van here, but crime scene tape is down. The police have cleared away, and things are back to normal here at this busy intersection of King and Portland. But around 3 a.m. this morning, a much different scene was playing out when gunshots were ringing through this intersection, and police were called here. They found one male victim who had suffered gunshot wounds to the lower part of his body. The latest update I just got from police is that he sustained non-life-threatening injuries. Some witnesses at the time said they saw a white SUV fleeing the area. Police did catch up with it. They found it with one bullet hole in it, and they said the occupants of that vehicle are cooperating. But again, no update from the police on whether that vehicle was involved in the shooting or simply fleeing from the scene because gunshots were ringing out. So the police are continuing to investigate, asking anyone with any information to come forward, but they'll also be going through some security camera footage that is, there's a security camera at this intersection on the telephone pole, the intersection behind me. So they'll be scouring through that to try and piece together what happened here. But it was definitely rattling local residents. There's quite a few condominiums and residences around here. Take a listen to what one local resident told us about what he experienced around 3 o'clock this morning.
Leaves me feel a little shaken. I mean, to wake up to these things in the middle of the night. You know, there's a lot of people around here that are normal people. We just happen to live in a busy neighborhood and nobody really seems to care about us. They say you should have known better.
That resident there expressing some frustration, Megan. So what are officials saying about this rash of unsolved shootings?
Yeah, well, they are, because this, like you mentioned, was the third shooting in a row here in Toronto, capping off a violent Canada Day long weekend. There was a brazen shooting Saturday night that killed 2 people right in downtown Toronto. The next night, 4 people injured in a shooting in Kensington Market. And then this latest shooting, the police chief of Toronto was saying yesterday that residents should feel safe. But I think police are understanding the anxiety. I can hear people talking about it on the streets, Andrew. Just a few minutes ago, while people were waiting for the light to change here, residents talking about the rash of shootings, and one person saying again another one. And officials are trying to reassure Torontonians, but at the same time calling for action. The Mayor of Toronto, John Tory, just spoke a few minutes ago. Here's what he's saying about what's going on here.
One of the reasons why we have to get together as 3 governments and as the police service to talk about these things is because it does require multiple efforts on the part of multiple governments and agencies. And so you look at the justice system, and it doesn't take that long, quite frankly, in my view anyway, to issue changed guidelines to the Crown attorneys to say, very simply, that those who are on bail already and who are found in possession of a handgun or committing a crime with a handgun, those who've been convicted previously of a handgun offense who are found in possession of a handgun should not be given bail.
So the mayor looking for some changes. We also heard from Premier Doug Ford yesterday, who put out a statement saying thoughts and prayers for the victims aren't enough. There needs to be some action. He was saying he wants to sit down with the mayor and with the Toronto police as well to try and talk through some strategies to see what they can do to curb some of this gun violence that the city of Toronto is currently experiencing. Andrew.
Megan, thank you. That is the CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick in Toronto. To consider the reasons for this spate of deadly shootings and what can be done about it, I'm joined by Professor Ju-Young Lee. He's a sociologist at the University of Toronto. So Ju-Young, what do you think explains the surge in gun violence in Toronto?
So there are many number of different things that could explain this recent spate of shootings. As the police chief and the mayor have mentioned, this could be related to intermittent gang conflicts that are now bubbling over into lethal shootouts. It might also indicate that there are more firearms on the streets. So some interesting data from the Toronto police. In 2014, there were 180 gun occurrences, which the police define as incidents where a person discharges a firearm and shoots it at somebody else. This year, in 2018, we're already at 200 recorded such occurrences. So we're quickly outpacing the number that we saw just a few years ago. And this is a trend that we've seen over the last couple of years. So one defensible hypothesis, I think, and I'm cautioning, and I'm saying this very delicately, is that there might be more firearms on the streets and that young people who are at risk might have more access to them.
Do you think that the areas that these shootings is taking place, does that concern you, just in terms of it being, right downtown?
I mean, the location does concern me, but I think shootings in any part of the city should concern every person in Toronto. I think it's interesting that in the aftermath of these recent shootings in downtown Toronto, the word brazen has been used quite a bit by journalists. And my response to that is that every shooting is brazen. Mm-hmm. Every shooting endangers the lives of passerby and bystanders. It's only that we don't really care, or collectively people don't notice as much when they're unfolding in racialized communities in Toronto, where this is a normal kind of occurrence. And so I would ask the general public to think about how they feel in the aftermath of these shootings and realize that there are communities in their backyards that experience this all the time.
Yeah, that is a very interesting point. People, they're looking to the mayor, to John Tory, to try and find solutions to all of this, and to the police, obviously, but he's saying that there's not going to be a magic wand fix. What do you make of that?
I mean, I agree with the sentiment of that. There isn't really a magic wand fix, but I can tell you that one solution that will not yield long-term positive results is just getting tough on crime. So often in the aftermath of shootings, particularly when they happen in places where people don't expect them to occur, there's this knee-jerk response to sort of send in police officers and start arresting people. There's talks about bringing back the TAVIS program, where police will stop youth of color on the streets and ask them about their potential ties to gangs and so forth. These kinds of measures can sometimes lead to short-term drops in crime rates, but they're not addressing the root causes, and so that's why they don't really work in the long run. So I think that in the long run, the city should be thinking about trying to eliminate the core conditions that are, driving young people into gangs, drug dealing, and other kinds of activities that increase their risks of being an offender or a victim of gun violence.
And so tell me about that. What are those core problems or core challenges?
So the biggest indicators that we have are concentrated intergenerational poverty in disadvantaged neighborhoods, racial exclusion from the labor market and from key institutions like higher education that can give at-risk youth a chance to get ahead in the world. These are the kinds of things that draw young people into activities and situations that increase their risks. The journalist David Simon, who wrote The Wire, has this great quote where he says, "The street corner is always hiring." And if you're a young person of color coming of age in a place where you don't see a lot of opportunity in front of you, you don't have people who are necessarily always helping you get a good job and so forth, then these kinds of illicit activities become much more attractive by comparison. And so if we want to really long-term reduce gun violence, we should be building a society that shields at-risk youth of color, Black Canadians, Indigenous youth, from getting involved in these kinds of activities. And I should say that there are a lot of community groups out there now who are already doing this work, and the government should be supporting them as well.
Drew Young, it was interesting talking to you today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
That's Associate Professor of Sociology, Ju Young Lee of the University of Toronto.